hand over to Susan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. To insure or not to insure for your goods in transit. This is something that comes up quite often, but only, unfortunately, it usually gets discussed properly when there's been an incident. And that's the wrong time to be wondering what kind of insurance you might or might not have. We should really be talking about insurance before there is an incident, not after. So our transit insurance is going to cover export and or import, whichever end of that transaction you are. And the comments I should be making cover both of those things. So you've got to look at your own insurance to see what it includes. Now, what risk is what we're asking about? What are you trying to insure? This is something that doesn't often get mentioned. People just make sweeping assumptions as to what they're trying to insure. Now, if you took your ordinary car, then you need to think about, is it just fire and third-party risk you're insuring? Or is it one that's a comprehensive insurance policy that covers all eventualities? Do we think about that with a motor vehicle? Do we think about that with our goods? Are we covering all eventualities or just some eventualities that might be top of the list for today? Well, we've got to start really at the very, very beginning. What is it we're concerned about? Are we worried about loss in transit, goods disappearing altogether? Are we worried about damage? So we do still have the goods, slightly bent, perhaps. What about delay? And is that delay that you caused? Delay that your carrier caused? Delay by another shipper, the other end of the transaction? Or is it delayed by customs? What kind of delay are you going to want to do to cover? There's also failed delivery. The goods just never get there. What are you going to do about that if the goods never arrive? And what about Brexit and the changes that's going to bring? Is that the reason for the delay? Are you looking to ensure that? Now, most people don't ask these questions at all. And somehow think by magic, whatever happens will be covered. Well, I'm sorry, but by magic it won't be. And your insurance policy, if you have one, may not cover all of those risks or indeed any of them in given circumstances. You may also, of course, have mitigated some of those risks yourselves, and therefore, if you pay for them under an insurance policy, you will be paying twice for the work that you did, plus the cost of the premium. Not sensible, really, in the long run. Why would you do that? I mean, for instance, you might think damage in transit is a big risk. Well, is that because your packaging is really dodgy, or is it because you think the mode of transport is really dodgy, or you're using, shall we call them a poor carrier rather than a good one? Perhaps they're likely to bang your goods about a lot. Is that a wise thing to do? Well, probably not. You see, you've got to think, what have you done? If you've given it superlative packing, do you want to cover a risk which is because of damage with packaging being too poor? That would be a waste of money. Whereas if you've done rubbish packaging, it might be a jolly good idea. What about GPS tracking? If you put GPS tracking on it, welcome to those joining us. If you put GPS tracking on your parcel, what are you worried about losing it? Theoretically, you can't lose it because there's a tracker on it. So again, are you insuring something that you actually don't need to pay for? That's one thing. What about choice of route and choice of timing? If you're afraid of loss in transit or damage in transit or delay in transit, have you elected for the right route? Have you discussed with your haulage company where they might park up overnight? Are they one of those who's going to leave their trailer doors open at night in a dark lay-by? That's something of a bigger risk than if they're going to park up overnight in a proper designated parking area with security lights and everything else. You know, what have you chosen? Your insurance should match your choice. Then, of course, we come to IncoTerms, because IncoTerms tell us whose risk, responsibility, and cost is whose at which point of the transit. So have you said you need insurance when actually it's the other party's job to insure it under the IncoTerm? Another silliness where you're going to pay in insurance for something you're not actually legally liable for. Where's the point in that one? There isn't. You shouldn't be doing it. It's a duplication. Don't do duplications. Don't spend money you don't need to spend. So IncoTerms will very much dictate that. And you might say, well, there's two IncoTerms which contain the I for insurance, CIP, CIF. You'd be right, there's two. But what's that I stand for? It stands for the exporter taking out a policy of insurance, and the risks differ between CIP and CIF, on behalf of the buyer. And it's the buyer's job to claim, and the buyer's going to pay you, the exporter, for the premium. So actually, it's not your policy at all. You're just there to facilitate the acquiring of a policy. It's not your policy. You won't be making the claim. And under CIP, it has to be a lot more risks covered than it does under CIF. That's the new IncoTerms 2020. They changed the insurance cover. So we need to think about that. Now, what about if you or any of the other parties in the supply chain are certified AEO? Now, if you're a certified AEO operator for security and safety, what are you insuring? Something you're already supposed to be superlative at, because that's what an AEO is good for under safety and security. And in that case, what about all those people in the chain? Are they also AEO? Have you, if they are you getting too much insurance? Saying it's too high a risk than it really is because they've all got safety and security, AEOS, and therefore you're at less risk. Should you be paying lower premiums because of that? Because everyone in the chain is AEO? The answer to that is yes, you should be paying lower premiums. Are you? Who knows? Who asked? Now's the time to think about that. We then, of course, come to the issue with insurance of what value are you insuring? How much insurance are you taking out? Are you saying that the contents of your package is worth £50 and you're taking out insurance for £50? Well, that actually wouldn't be the norm under transit insurance. It's normally what we call CIP or CIF plus 10%. That's the norm that is usually taken out. So have you added 10% to your £50? Because if not, you might get bitten a bit later if you have to bring in actually insurance because you haven't insured it for enough money. But equally, it might be that you've not insured the freight cost. Now, I've always worked on the argument that if I'm taking out insurance, I want every penny back that I've spent on that failed delivery. Well, I'm not going to get it back if I only insure the goods, because I've lost more than that. I've lost the freight cost, and I lost the insurance premium. I insured that as well. But, you can choose how conservative with a small c to be on that front. You can decide to have everything covered or just the goods covered. That is your choice as the person getting the insurance. What have you chosen to do? This is the question. So you've got to give a lot of thought to what it is you are insuring. We then come to the famous insurance clause in what is often called marine insurance, although actually it's good for air freight, road freight and trains, but it's called marine insurance for history. Are you getting the all risks clause? And what does that mean if you are? Well, it doesn't mean what you think it means. It does not mean all risks you could possibly dream up, because it usually comes as an all risks except for, and then we get things like strikes, riots, and civil commotions are often quoted. That's one of the good ones that usually appears. But what does that mean? Well, imagine if you had a truck crossing London the other day during one of those peaceful protests which later in the day turned into somewhat less peaceful protests, with people vandalising things and breaking shops and vehicles. Now, what if your van was caught up in that? What if you've got all risks except strikes, riots and civil commotions? That counts as a civil commotion. So you wouldn't be insured. Oh dear. Bit of a problem there. Suddenly you paid a premium, you expected to be covered, and you're not. Now put that not in London that we might all be familiar with, but somewhere elsewhere in the world that we don't. I just had a question. Does all risks usually cover industrial strikes at ports? Not if it says except strikes, riots and civil commotions. In that case, any kind of strike, official or unofficial, is excluded. You see that clause, 3 little words, strikes, riots and civil commotions, or 4 words there, for 3 concepts, actually covers an awful lot of trouble we can find around the world. It could just be the people in Calais have gone on strike again. You know, they do that periodically, and they blockade the port periodically if they're not getting what they want. So that's the strike perhaps by fishermen, and all of a sudden you're caught up in it because your ferry can't dock, and your insurance is null and void. So we really need to look at the detail of what seem to be some quite archaic clauses. Actually, if you read them carefully, they're not that bad. But who reads them? The answer to that was I did. And I made sure they covered what I needed for my goods in transit, whether they were worth 10 pence or 10 million. I was always careful with my insurance policy. So we've got to watch out for that. Now, strikes, riots and civil commotions is all very well. What about force majeure? Is that covered? That's usually a separate one. Acts of God. You know, you suddenly got caught in an unseasonal rainstorm, everything fell apart, or the lorry went off the road. Is that an act of God? Are you still covered? Possibly not. So what about force majeure? And then, of course, very topical, we have COVID-19 and all the disruption that caused to the supply chain. Who's insured for what in that circumstance? Does your insurance cover you for that? If you're taking it out new now, probably not. And probably not explicitly before, because such a thing wasn't dreamt of. So it's probably excluded and you're not covered. So you might want to think about adding cover in for that sort of thing into your insurance, especially at this time where it's causing almost random disruption around the world and we don't know who's releasing what at any given time. So we must look at the clauses, but then we've got to ask, is what's on offer for our insurance under those clauses actually fitting what I promised to do? Did I promise to get this thing to a place by a particular day? So I'm really bothered about delays, because if I don't get it there, they can come back to me and say that they want, they're going to want recompense or something. Does it cover absolutely what I said I'd do regarding type of transport or not? Is it only for air when I've suddenly sent this by sea? Or the other way around. What's in that? What did I promise to do versus what am I insuring? People forget to look at that because that can change with different contracts, with different people. So we really need to give a thought to that before we embark on our insurance. So that's there. Then we have, how much is your item worth to you? Probably the cost price, not the selling price. Versus how much is it going to cost you to get suitable, and I put the word suitable in there, suitable insurance. Is it going to cost you really in a year so much money for premiums that you're making a loss on the goods? That's not sensible. And you might think, well, that'll never happen. It does. I've seen it happen. You've got to be very careful about working out whether it's worth your while insuring in the first place. Or is the premium too steep for you? Are you going to be paying so much money, it's not worth the bother in the first place? Then we have is the one insurance premium. Well, many companies have a corporate goods in transit policy, the big ones, and they will have a sort of standardized policy, if you like, with an annual premium for a huge amount of money that covers all the goods this company would be dealing with throughout the year, which is fine. But the question you've got to ask there is there actually a different notional premium for a particular set of countries which are considered more risky than others? You might think of, if I'm shipping to Syria, it's going to be rather more risky than if I'm shipping to France, perhaps. So there may be a group of countries or groups of countries which have different costs and premiums associated with them. There may be different goods that have different premiums and risks associated with them. And there may be different types of goods that also have different risks and costs associated with them. So you need to work out, again, it's not sort of with a corporate policy, people go, oh, it's on the corporate policy, it's fine. Actually, it's not so fine. And big mistakes can be made because you under cost that insurance premium when you do your costings and your sale prices to clients, if you're going to pay it. So again, you need to think about different goods in different places. Are there differences? Well, then we come to, what if you don't insure? It's a choice. What if you do not insure? What does this do? Well, some people call that self-insurance. Because if your goods depart, they never get where they're going, then the chances are under your contract, you've simply to take another one out of stock and send that. So you've lost the cost price of your item. Now, if you work out that over a year, 6 months, whatever it is, you don't actually have many losses, touch wood when you say that, or something like that, then maybe you don't need to insure. Maybe if your supply chains and your destinations aren't all that risky, insurance is a waste of money and time. And it'd be better for you just to have an extra few items in stock in case of anything going wrong and just supply another one, from your cost base at that time. Now, that, of course, means we're relying on something else if we actually want to recover any money. And it could be that we're going to rely on the carrier's insurance, because they do insure themselves. Now, what does that mean? Well, that depends on your method of transport, because each method of transport is governed by some very archaic sets of legislation. Things such as the Hague-Visby rules. You may never have heard of these wonderful things, or the Montreal Convention, or the Warsaw Convention. Actually, those transport conventions also govern insurance. And they look at, for your carrier, the airline or the sea carrier, whatever, the haulier, a particular level of insurance that they might be expected to pay out. Now, that might be, and I can give you a couple of rates because, of course, it's not written in sterling. This is written in standard drawing rights. So you have to do an exchange rate conversion to find out how much they might pay out. If you don't insure, you just rely on what they might have covered. Now, by sea, Hague-Visby recently, can't say up-to-date exchange rate, but close, was £2.24 per kilo lost. And that's per gross kilo lost. Now, if you think about almost anything, and it's compared to its weight, would £2.24 cover it? I doubt it. You could have a diamond ring in that box and it weighs less than a quarter of a kilo. So imagine what you're going to get back. Nothing is the answer. By road, it's a little bit better. £9.33 under a CMR convention per kilo. By air, there's two choices depending what you're signed up for. £24.64 a kilo, that's a bit better, or £19.04 a kilo. So they're a bit better, but I would wager they still wouldn't cover it. And then if you go with your freight agent belonging to BIFA, the British International Freight Agents Association, they have standard terms and conditions, which, if you're on their side of the transaction, quite rightly limit their loss, and that's £2.24 per kilo. So regardless of the method of transport, if they're under BIFA terms, it's £2.24. So you can see that if you are relying on a carrier, you're not going to get much back. And you're only going to get that paltry sum back if you can prove they were negligent. Now, how are you going to do that in a modern supply chain, where it went from your base on a truck, it went to some loading station near the airport or into a container at a seaport, or the back of a truck somewhere else at a freight station. Somebody else then handled it, drove it somewhere, air freighted it somewhere, some other handlers took it off. How do you know whose fault was what? You don't know who did that. You can't prove who was negligent. Well, if you can't do that, you can't even make a paltry claim under those conventions. It's a complete loss. You're not going to get pennies back at all. And it's going to take you a lot of time and trouble to do it. Now, you can put tracking devices on your cargo. You can put what we used to call stopwatches, which is simply a device with little beads in it, 2 colours, which if it gets turned upside down or mistreated, the colours mix. And they're supposed to sign at each handoff to see if the colours are mixed. That's old-fashioned technology, but it does have its place. And we used to have shock watches as well, where again, little coloured beads would mix if it was given a good bang and a good bump along the way. So hopefully then, because they're meant to sign off each handoff, you could tell who did it. But that's going to a lot of time and trouble, just to prove who was negligent and get £2.24 back a kilo. It's not really worth your while. So relying on those carriers' own insurance, I would suggest is pointless. Now then we get to another sort of risk which people forget about in modern times, but shouldn't. It applies to sea freight, and it's something called general average. Now this was a concept dreamt up way back in history, but we're currently working on yet another one of those protocols, which is the York-Antwerp rules from 1974. They're telling us all about the general average rule. Now, this is a rule that says if, let's say, your ship's on the high seas, your goods are in a container minding their own business, but somewhere else another container blows up and it's above yours in the stack, and the only thing they can do is jettison those containers involved in that stack before something else goes bang and the ship goes down. They're going to do that. They're going to jettison those containers to save the ship. Now, what if you get jettisoned? No fault of your own, probably you and several others, in order to save the ship from sinking. That's called general average. And at that point, these rules come in, and what they say is basically what has been sacrificed, that which was thrown overboard, for the benefit of all, shall be made good by the contribution of all. So what that means under general average is that whatever was jettisoned, they'll work that out eventually, well, everybody else on the ship has to pay a proportion of the loss to those who lost money. Now that's the clause that's written into every maritime agreement. Now that's not so bad if you're unaffected by this loss. You know, it wasn't yours that went missing, but there's a lot of containers go missing. That could be a sizable payout that you're going to have to pay. Well, you want that to be your insurer has to pay, not you. If you're self-insuring, you have to pay. And if that ship went down because of your container, you were the one who blew up and took the ship with it. Imagine how that's going to work when you're the one who's got to pay out to all those other people because you're the one who caused the shipwreck. That's not going to go well. Not likely to go well anyway, because there can be millions of pounds worth of cargo on a ship. Normally they carry, what, 3,000 to 6,000 containers full of cargo? The latest one carries over, I think it was 26,000 containers. The biggest ones. Yeah, that's a mega ship. Just came into London up the Thames the other day. Now, over 26,000 containers. And it does happen. They have to jettison containers at sea. Or in the port even, but you can't salvage them. You know, they're gone. So you really do need to make sure you're covered by general average. Those doing your insurance actually know what general average is and that the risk you're taking when it goes by sea freight. So you've got to be very careful about that. There are equivalents for air freight, but not particularly road. or rain, although I dare say they'd try. If everything came to grief, there'd be something said. So I'm going to stop there and ask if there's any questions that you would like to ask.
Okay, well, I'm going to unmute all of the microphones, and feel free to ask any questions that you have. Right, your microphones are live. Please ask any questions you'd like to of Susan.
Any questions? Or have I just frightened you into silence? Not my intention. This is all about preparing to not be frightened.
Gareth Young here. The situation where a number of containers goes off the top of a ship, and it may be millions of pounds. Does that, and that gets distributed amongst the balance of the people who are shipping? Does that include where there's like a houseway bill, or how does it work if you have multiple consignments within a container, such as with a forwarder? That's the first question.
Yeah.
The second is, how often does that actually happen? You know, how often?
Well, the first part of the question is, each of the consignors, each of the shippers in that less than container load type container would be liable for their own proportion.
So not the forwarder?
Not the forwarder. It is the shipper who is liable.
Wow.
Either the exporter or the importer, depending on your IncoTerms.
Gotcha.
It's the shipper, receiver, not the agent in between. It's not their cargo. They don't have an insurable loss. It's not their goods, you see.
No, they're just what their freight, and their margin. That's it.
Well, they're still getting that, even if they go off the time. That's still payable to them. So the second part of your question, how often does it happen? More often than we'd like to think is the answer to that. We have fires, we have containers fall off in a storm or rough weather. A lot of that was attributed to shippers being naughty and not properly declaring the contents, so by weight often. So the containers were unbalanced. So if you get thrown about a lot in rough weather, then some containers can tip off the top of the stack and bring others with them, because their load, when they were load planned, didn't say they were a heavy one they were putting on top. They thought it was a light one, which would be more sensible. You know, heavy ones nearer the bottom of the stack. So that was attributed, you know, much of that was attributed to shipper fault. And therefore, they brought in a new law about everything being weighed twice. Everything has to now be reweighed for sea freight because of that. That was so prevalent. Then we have naughty shippers who don't declare the proper cargo, and it's hazardous cargo, or it mustn't be mixed with something else. Used to have that many years ago when I used to do some shipping for a particular company, to household cleaners in the same container, actually, even when sealed, give off some gases and have a tendency to go bang if you let them mix. Which is not a good thing. But if you don't declare that properly, either through ignorance or whatever, because it's cheaper not to declare it as hazardous, then you put the ship in peril, you put the plane in peril.
Yep.
We have it now with lithium batteries doing the same for air freight.
Yeah. A
tendency to start a fire if shipped in too larger quantities or not declared. So there's a lot of things to this, but as a shipper, you're never going to be able to prove the negligence of the carrier. All they're going to go back on is you didn't tell them something, or you didn't do something, or it was loaded in an unbalanced way. You know, something like that, or it leaked because you used the wrong containers inside, you know, glass instead of plastic, something like that. So it's going to end up with some sort of argy-bargy on that front, before they take any blame themselves.
Well, as you would, you try and mitigate your own risk. You know, that's all they're doing.
Yes, that's right, they are, and sometimes you can prove negligence, but it's very rare. But I'm afraid we do see rather more containers floating off on the ocean than perhaps get publicised. They do if you take the shipping papers. You know, you see pictures of ships, or sometimes on media, you'll see pictures of ships with bent and broken stacks of containers. You will hear of aircraft where there have been fires and near misses with bringing
Yes.
aircraft down. That
It's got
happened
to
in
turn the power on.
that sort of thing. So it does happen, I'm afraid. And of course, the one you don't insure will be the one that it happens to. This is the problem, isn't it? That's what insurance is all about. If you don't insure, guess what? We all know, guess what? Yours will be the one that's the problem, that has the problem. And you're talking about the whole journey, not just a piece of the journey. So I hope that's given you some better information about insurance for goods in transit, some food for thought, at least, and hopefully you'll be happier shippers in the future, rather than very sad and stressed shippers when it all goes badly wrong.
Does anybody else have a question for Susan? No more questions, Susan, so back to you.
Okay, was Garth just about to ask one?
Yeah, it actually came back, and I won't take up too much of your time with this, but it goes back to a business I had many years ago. I had two HS748s, and they were operating in Western Australia. But we had on one occasion, we had had someone who actually put a drum of toluene and marked it as printer's ink, and then packaged it up in a wooden box. Now, apart from the fact that, you know, in the 748, the cabinet's about 9,000 feet, so this stuff could have sprayed everywhere inside the hold on the main deck. But I wondered when I got down there, I was thinking, well, who would be at fault there? Would it be, it came through a forwarder, would it be the forwarder? Would it be the shipper? You know, would it be my own people for not you know, checking that consignment properly?
It would at root be the shipper for misdeclaring it.
Yeah.
The forwarder should perhaps have had a duty of care to check it. You know, if the drum is labelled toluene, they might have spotted that was different to the paperwork.
No, it didn't. It didn't actually label it toluene. It was labelled printer's ink.
It's shipper's fault.
But it stank of solvent in air. So yeah. Anyway.
Well, somebody might have raised a flag then, but actually legally that was shipper's fault to start with. Well, and just silliness on part of the transport operator, because they wouldn't want it blowing up in their vehicle, would they?
No, they wouldn't.
So that's why they should be taking some measures to have some sanity checking, shall we say.
Yes, well, I should have done that, but anyway.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. We are about to run out of time.